Hello, beloved. It's us again. Our our first attempt at unpacking federal bureaucracy was cut short
We
because
wouldn't want you to miss a single scintillating moment.
scintillating. So we're going to try it again, and hopefully the the overlords over at Google will allow for this time. Hi, everybody. It's Amy and Rima, co-founders of the Lois Curtis Center, located in Topeka, Kansas. And we want to piggyback on all the conversations that are being had about federal bureaucracy as the DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, is creating all kind of chaos at the federal level, and I guess are going to swoop in and create a new semblance of order or whatever, order out of chaos. Aleister Crowley would be proud, I'm sure. Anyhow, we thought it would be apropos to have a conversation about what federal bureaucracy is, from a few vantage points that don't get a lot of attention when folks are talking about bureaucracy, trimming the fat, quote unquote, small government, et cetera, et cetera. Because as we love to do at the Lois Curtis Center, we focus at the intersection of systemic racism and disability. And a key driving force of systemic anything is bureaucracy. And so that's how we're going to insert ourselves into this conversation as agency and administration at the federal level. Get the old DOGE scalpel taken to it. We want to talk about that and focus less so on the money, because the fact of the matter is, as we've learned recently, despite the fact that there's been an extraordinary amount of cutting of jobs and programs at the federal level, the DOGE has saved the federal government $0. And yet it persists. And so the question begs, what's really going on? What if it's not a money saving thing, then what is what's really happening here? And so let's do it.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that we also want to, as with many things, like, I don't know, elections, there appears to be sort of running commentaries that there's a duality of choices, that there's one choice or there's another choice. And as folks who have been, beating the drum of, dismantling systemic oppression, the bureaucracy plays a very integral role in that. And so folks want to, so the dialogue that's going on now is, on the one hand, well, a complete, dismembering, disemboweling, destruction of federal bureaucracies on the one hand. And then that is actually being sort of pitted against, this oppositional, preservation at all costs, this narrative, about the necessity of these systems. And it was, as with almost everything, we really want to encourage folks, you don't have to bite on either of those. There are other options. There is, a third option, that once we have an opportunity to sort of unpack what the bureaucracy is about, and who benefits from the bureaucracy and who gets ground up in that bureaucracy, that hopefully folks will see that they're being given, false choices that there are other options to explore as well.
Yes. When we have discussed dismantling systems of oppression, we were not talking about what's happening now. What's happening now is, as Amy said, more of a dismembering, disemboweling. It is a destroying. It is a destruction, and that's not what we've been talking about. It's not something that we have advocated for. We have, when we have discussed dismantling systems of oppression, we've done so because we recognize that, that the mechanisms of the system, which are informed by and driven by bureaucracy, have created and sustained, a playing field that has, identified one group as the winners and lots of other groups as the losers. And so when we have discussed dismantling systems of oppression, it has been, in the interest of encouraging people to look at the game board, so to speak, and perhaps brainstorm, different ways of playing it that do not necessitate, winners and a few winners and a whole bunch of losers. Right now, everybody's losing. Well, AI. AI is winning.
0.01%.
Right, right. For all we know, once everything gets gutted, it's going to be replaced by AI. And I would say that that's absolutely what's happening. And so just that disclaimer that what's happening now, because the word dismantling is being used in the context of what the DOGE is doing, and we would offer, instead of using that word, to use disemboweling, because I think that's more apropos to what's happening. So putting that out there, if just disemboweling, if disrupting, the bureaucracy of the federal government, is something that's happening right now, and the rationale has been wanting the desire to increase efficiency, and with the increase of efficiency, decrease the amount of money that is going towards the federal government, or not going towards the federal government, but decreasing the cost of doing what is done on a day-to-day basis at the federal level, has been offered as the rationale for the creation of the DOGE, and then of course the execution, of the DOGE. And what we've seen this week, as far as what's been shared with us by major media outlets, which is that, at present the DOGE has saved $0, saved us $0, despite the fact that tens of thousands of positions have been cut. Um, Aid packages that were slated to be released to, other countries, or to programs in this country, have been halted or completely just, kaputted. Despite all of that, no money has been saved, and yet the DOGE continues right now. As of March 7th, the IRS staffing, 10,000 plus positions are slated to be, ended at the IRS. The Veterans Administration, Social Security Administration, the entirety of the Department of Education is on the chopping block. And so all this is happening, even though we all know, that the DOGE has saved saved $0. And so why is all of this happening? Um, and uh, and 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 why are we talking about it? Um, so as far as human services are concerned, um, particularly human service agencies that play in federal funding in one way, shape, or form, be it Medicaid, be it uh, some kind of federal grant or contract or that kind of thing. Um, you know, bureaucracy is kind of par for the course as far as those funds and how they operate at within the federal government, and then how they operate within the non-governmental entities, the nonprofit organizations that receive those funding, and so those funds. And so there's bureaucracy at the federal level as far as the releasing of those funds to the organizations, and then those organizations have bureaucracy in and of themselves. And then in the midst of all of that, theoretically, there's some kind of service, support, or relief that is being provided to, well, in the human services, a marginalized community, people with disabilities, aging people, children, et cetera, et cetera. So according to the Heritage Foundation, which we do not quote often, and so huge caveat there, in 2019, the federal government spent over $28,000 per person in poverty in this country. And you see these kinds of numbers thrown out when the Republican Party in particular is having engaging in persuasive conversations intended to get you to think, oh, we need to trim a lot of money. But the fact of the matter is when you factor in the bureaucracy at the federal level, and then the bureaucracy within the non-governmental entity or organization that's receiving federal funding to provide a service to a certain demographic, that it's not that people in poverty are just getting a check cut out to them every year for $28,000 by Uncle Sam, and best wishes, have fun buying filet mignon with that money. No, the majority of that funding is being used to pay the bureaucrat that is the program officer at the federal level, to pay the organization, that to ensure that their lights are kept on, that their administrative functions are functioning, and then there are the costs for the actual program, and at the end of the day, when you unpack all of that, that $28,000 per person in poverty, the majority of it is eaten up in the kind of do-si-do that happens when a service or support is being administered to a person. It's from the top, the federal government, down to the person. There are a lot of hands that are at play as far as that $28,000 check is concerned. A lot of bureaucratic mechanisms that need their portion of that $28,000, and that's an important point of consideration when we're talking about the vantage point of bureaucracy being the wasteful spending, and then zeroing in on quote unquote people in poverty. That person in poverty is not actually receiving much of that money. I mean, there might be a little bit of temporary assistance for needy families, or food stamps, or SSI, but the vast majority of that money is being fed to the bureaucratic machine, so to speak. I feel like I've said a lot. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Well, So, well, I mean, I guess the thing that always strikes me, I mean, and again, to sort of move us away from this duality in thinking is, is what happens if $28,000 is given directly to somebody to create a base income? I mean, and that's kind of that's one of the discussions, that's the discussion that people, that's not what's happening now. That's not what's going to happen under the
No.
the uh, DOGE. Um, that but again, that also is not what was going to happen. It's not what happened under the Biden administration.
No.
That's not what was going to happen, under Democrat leadership either.
It never would, even though more often than not, cutting a check to an actual person is going to be the most efficient and economical course of action.
Yes. And so, so there's the why, right? There's a big question of why behind that. And whether it is, well, and we know that one of the biggest, answers to that why is because of assumptions about the racial profile of folks who require who utilize support, which of course also turns out not to be entirely accurate. It's just base bigotry, and then also moralizing around how it is that people spend their money.
Right, right,
how,
right.
how those people how those people spend their money, and this assumption that that folks, that the grantors or the grant managers or whatever, the folks at the federal level, that they exercise a certain standard of care, and that the agencies at the state and local level exercise each a certain standard of care, at that an individual themselves would not with given just the $28,000.
Right. It just buy a bunch of drugs and filet mignon and brainless entertainment. I mean that's what that I mean we're talking about uh bureaucracy as parent basically of people who
As an
yeah
agent of control.
as an agent of control for people that have been marginalized by the system. So the system marginalizes people and then it judges people to be incompetent basically to handle the resource that would lift them at least out of poverty, and that is that is as far as when this tiny little portion of the bureaucracy conversation as it pertains to people that tap into human services in this country, and the bureaucracy that is kind of wrapped around them and the nonprofit sector. We're talking about control, and we're talking about the bureaucratization, um, and through the bureaucratization, the validation, the bureaucratization, and through the bureaucratization, the validation of this portion of the system operating the way that it does, because people who are on SSI, people who are on food stamps, people with disabilities, et cetera, you know, whether it's said explicitly or through a series of soft dog whistles, don't cannot be trusted in the way that the non-governmental organization can be trusted to handle these dollars. It's curious because when we think about corporate welfare, as far as I know, there's no specific um, agency at the federal level that's staffed with program officers that are monitoring the funding that goes towards big banks when they need a bailout. There's no bureaucratic control as far as what is actually a significantly larger amount of money in comparison to the amount of money that we're talking about as far as human services are concerned.
Well, and so I think, so that's one aspect of, so when we talk about bureaucracy being a component of the system of oppression, that is, I mean, sort of at this very base level, there's that level of power and control, but that's not it. That's not all, right?
No, there that allow us to share a quote from American University professor Robert Durant, who participated in a study of bureaucracy about a decade ago. And he says, public bureaucracies are not designed for efficiency. So there's an intentionality there. They're not designed to be efficient. They're designed through negotiations and compromise among competing interests to ensure that they will have power, access, and influence over later policy decisions made by agencies. And I'll add other stakeholders as well. When you try to reorganize agencies, you have to simultaneously reorganize the congressional committee structures which oversee those agencies, and members of those committees are going to resist. As we're currently seeing, we've got members of Congress who are members of committees, a variety of committees, that are being impacted by what's happening with the DOGE, who are like, hey, can we please have a seat at the table with the DOGE as they make decisions that profoundly impact these committees that we sit on and wield a lot of positional power and authority through.
So in Congress, the way that it works is that there is status and power associated with the committees that that our elected officials are assigned to, and some of that devolves back. So for example, in Kansas for a number of years, we had a Senator Brownback, who served on the agricultural committee. Well, Kansas is an agricultural state, has that gives him value as a politician to our state, and so his ability to influence the USDA, pick subsidies, relief for farmers, things like that, minimize environment EPA restrictions, things like that. That gives him as a congressperson a substantial amount of power, and influence that he is able to, sort of, peddle in order to maintain his own position. And so that's what we're talking about, is that if you're a member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee and the Department of Education goes bye-bye, well, you're now the member of the kind of Health and Labor and Pensions Committee, except for that if HHS goes down the stinker, well, now we're Labor and Pensions, except for that actually NLRB has been, well, I don't know. I don't really know what the hell I'm doing here in Congress or what use I have for the people back home.
So that's a biggie. That's a biggie. And it's not just these Congress people that sit on these committees that are impacted. It's as far as bringing it to the world of human services, it's Big Disco. It's the advocacy organizations that have created a need for themselves by having the ear of Tom Harkin in the past, or Bob Casey. Oh, poor bastard. And having some semblance of access in the interest of informing policy or legislation.
And then not just influence with their Congress people, but with the actual bureaucracy itself.
Right. To the point of, feeling some semblance of power when you are privy to proprietary information that is not public yet. And that can include information that could potentially be incredibly impactful to people with disabilities. Being privy to that information, knowing that you have information your many of your colleagues don't necessarily have, and certainly your average everyday person with a disability doesn't have. There's a power in that. And unfortunately, um, there can be times where people who have that power prioritize the care and the maintenance of and the sustainability of that power, um, honestly, over the mission, vision, values of their organizations or their respective movement. We see this at play at present, with regards to Texas versus Becerra and how that lawsuit, which was filed in September of 2024, was not made public effectively until January 20th, 24th of 2025, which rendered this incredibly potentially impactful lawsuit, which has significant implications as far as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, rendered that lawsuit proprietary for several months, because you had big disco kind of sitting on that proprietary information and not sharing it, and being dismissive of the handful of people who knew about that lawsuit and followed up with the big advocacy organizations to see what they were doing about that lawsuit, until they saw fit to begin to speak publicly about that lawsuit, and give us little people our marching orders as far as what we needed to do in our respective states, to quote unquote take action. And that's truly unfortunate. And Texas versus Becerra is not the only example of that. The human services world is rife with examples of a variety of stakeholders who have artificially created mechanisms of power, largely through via bureaucratic means, to kind of cement themselves as being people or organizations or entities of power, and nobody, nobody's people are going to be freed by playing those games.
And again, and these are all aside from the fact that the reinforcement and the support of bureaucracies, as a moral matter, because they're about exerting control and power over the end user. But the bureaucracies are also, why are they important? Well, because they offer power and control to people on a variety of levels.
Yeah, and when I will posit, this is Rima kind of stepping away, and offering a view and an opinion that might not necessarily be that of the Lois Curtis Center, but one of the reasons why the Democratic Party in particular, and people who identify as Democrats, I think have been kind of distraught as far as what's happening with the bureaucracy at the federal level, is because we're talking about a party that that loses a lot, and has become very good at, in the absence of not being operating in the majority as far as the House or the Senate, or being in power at the White House, or certainly being in a majority with the Supreme Court, has created opportunity to exercise its authority as far as the more subtle factions of the federal government are concerned. And so, the more covert manifestations of power that we see with bureaucracy, which of course create the infrastructure or strengthen the foundation and allow for the more newsworthy manifestations of power to occur in this country. And so you've got again this the yin to the yang, so to speak, as far as how power operates in our system of oppression.
And there is also the fact that it pays well.
Right, right, right.
There is also the fact that it pays well.
Right, 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 right. So there was a study that was done in 2016 by Harvard University. So this isn't just Amy and Rima running off at the mouth. That found that the United States spends upwards of $3 trillion a year on quote unquote excess bureaucracy. That is nearly 20% of the United States gross domestic product. And to put that in human terms, that I'm sure that our administrative, middle management, et cetera, friends at various nonprofit organizations will appreciate or not. What we're talking about as far as positions are concerned in this country, that means that there are 21.4 million folks employed in the U.S. workforce, including almost 9 million people in like management, administrative type positions that are, according to Harvard University, through no fault of their own, and I would beg to differ on that one, are creating no nothing of value as far as economic output is concerned. These are the people, folks, that are in the absence of doing anything that's of value, are creating bureaucracy to ensure that they are perceived as being essential. And so that is another piece of the bureaucracy conversation that needs to be brought to the forefront. The sheer number of people who are kind of engineering the perception that they are necessary, so that they can maintain their career. They are necessary, so that they can maintain their career, and their organization can maintain its perception of being needed. This is not necessarily something that has been studied on in any organized capacity, but there are a lot of positions like this in the nonprofit sector, in the non-governmental sector. There are a lot of positions that are like this that are being paid that are being paid for with federal funding. And the people in these positions and the organizations that are creating a need for themselves through bureaucracy are cognizant of that enough to really want to do what they can to ensure that a closer look isn't taken as far as conversation